Yes, yes, which is a great segue to our next story, which also comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title is "New
It's
Details."
almost,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost like I read ahead.
It's almost like you knew what was coming up. Yes.
Sorry.
So,
Back.
so this, by the way, just for those of you who are following along, is a follow up to a story we covered last week. Last week we talked about a browser plugin from a company called Cyberhaven that had been hacked, and actually really not hacked, but replaced with a malicious version that was stealing credentials. And so this is a follow up to that. A lot more details have come out on how it happened. You know, at the time last week, we were at least I was kind of scratching my head on what Cyberhaven had done wrong that allowed a bad actor to access their Chrome store account. And this article actually explains that in pretty good detail. And by the way, it was not just Cyberhaven's extension. It was a total of 35 or perhaps even more extensions that were impacted, with a collective estate of about 2.6 million installs, which is a fair number.
That we know of so far.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like it could be it could be bigger than that, but what they have been able to track down as of now indicates that it was 35 extensions covering about 2.6 million installs. So the way this happened was a phishing email was sent out to the owners of a number of different extensions, and it was a larger set than just the 35. I don't exactly know how many went out, but it was certainly kind of a en masse spear phishing attack. And it took a very clever alternative to bypass multi-factor. So they actually did have multi-factor authentication enabled, and it did not bypass that. It did not hack their accounts. But what it did was present an email that basically told the maintainer of the plugins that their plugin was violating some aspect of the Chrome store's rules, and looked very official. And it had a link to had a button with a link to a somewhat official looking URL. And when you clicked on that URL, it then took you to another Google page, which was in GCP, that asked the victim here to basically establish an OAuth trust between an application that the attacker was using, and that application actually had a fairly legitimate looking name called Privacy Policy Extension, which existed in Google's cloud. And if you accepted that application now had OAuth access, because you were granting certain rights to it, to your Chrome store account. And one of the rights that it granted the adversary was the ability to replace the plugin that you had for offer. And so that's exactly what happened. And then for each of those plugins, the adversary was fairly sophisticated in this. They created specific domains to collect information from the plugin. And remember that these plugins were altered to collect login information from the end victim's web browsers. There's more information about that too. This was apparently very focused on collecting Facebook business login information, allegedly, apparently for the purpose of stealing money and perpetuating other scams. But they were,
which is surprising, because I consider most businesses on Facebook a scam in and of themselves.
The irony is not lost on me.
So for all the effort for this fairly sophisticated and effective campaign, it seemed like a somewhat low-level goal, Facebook business account logins, but maybe there's more to it.
Yeah, it's unclear if this is the end of if we've hit bedrock on what's going on here. But
I mean, inevitably they'll be pimping some sort of crypto coin. That's what must happen by law.
It all leads back to crypto. Yes, it really does. One of the concerns that I have, and this is, I think, where you were going. This is a very sophisticated, or at least what we would have in the past called a very sophisticated attack. It's tailored to each individual, plugins owner. They're actually registering bespoke domains so that if one of the end victims looks at the traffic that is leaving, it looks like it's going to a domain associated with the plugin that they have installed. So they went through some pretty extensive lengths to make it look legitimate. So, I guess kudos to the Cyberhaven people, because I think without them, I'm not sure this would have been known. But I think they're the ones that figured out that this was going on. So, again, kudos to them. But this I think, and I'm concerned about this going forward, is a sophisticated attack for, I don't want to call it pedestrian, but I am going to call it pedestrian, for kind of pedestrian purposes. It's like run of the mill cybercrime type stuff using what we would have in the past called pretty advanced tactics. So
Yeah.
I'm a little, it causes me some pause. Let's say it that way.
Yeah, I would agree. It was effective too. And one thing I was looking at is they've got some details of what the phishing email said, which I thought was interesting. And just dissecting this a little bit, the phishing email, which appeared to come, I'm quoting from the article here. The phishing email, which is made to appear as if it comes from Google, claims that the extension is in violation of the Chrome Web Store policies and has a risk of being removed. Quote, we do not allow extensions with misleading, poorly formatted, non-descriptive, irrelevant, excessive, or inappropriate metadata, including but not limited to the extension description, developer name, title, icon, screenshots, and promotional images. And then, it goes on and gives a link to fix it, which is what ends up granting the permissions and the rights to go modify it. But this is very classic phishing technique that I think is worth calling out. There's a sense of urgency that, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to rip down your extension and you won't have it published. It's a position of authority coming to tell you this. It feels like your job could be at risk because it's basically saying you did something wrong as the Chrome extension developer, and this may get you in trouble if you don't fix it as soon as possible. And all these things are there. Plus, you've got MFA enabled for most of these folks. Your creds aren't being compromised. It's a very clever attack that pushes all the psychological attack buttons to get people to follow the link and grant this permission to modify their Chrome extension. So yeah, there's a decent level of sophistication here that it was effective. And we only know of 35. We don't know how many others might have been targeted as well. Maybe that will come out, but there's more investigation ongoing. But to your point, it does seem a lot of effort or a lot of sophistication for what appears to be low-level wins, relatively speaking.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if there's any sort of metrics that come out about how much damage they were able to do with access. I'm assuming they were successful in exfiltrating some number of Facebook business account credentials from the 2.6 million. There's no indication of that in this article, but would be very interesting to know how lucrative this was. Maybe this is, a very financially viable attack that we're just not, we're underplaying or underselling. But on its surface, it looks like a lot of effort for what they, at least to me, seems like they would have gotten out of it. More to come, I'm sure.
Indeed. It's interesting though. Very interesting little attack.
Yeah. The thing that I thought, other than, this is as an attack tactic, the thing that I found most interesting was the attack on OAuth, right? It's not violating, the protocol. It's, there is no vulnerability here. It's just that people are being tricked into establishing a trust relationship with some untrustworthy application. And that as a tactic doesn't rely phishing resistant credentials don't help there. Multi-factor authentication doesn't help there. This is like fundamentally different type of problem than we've seen in the past, I'm not going to say it's new. I mean, I think we've seen this in the past. There's been some issues with Microsoft Azure Active Directory, or Entra, I guess is what they call it these days, where similar things have happened. I think it's something to be aware of, and certainly something that I think we're going to have to start factoring into our security awareness training, because I'm not aware that anybody is covering that.
Yeah, and it's a tough one. I mean, you're basically telling your employees, think very carefully before granting permissions, and they're very used to just clicking through those boxes. Very
Mm-hmm.
used to it. So it's because we were sort of riffing on the last time. Did they have MFA turned off? Like, how did they get so easily popped? This is far more sophisticated of an attack than we were sort of anticipating when we first heard about this.
Yeah, definitely. So I my hats off to Cyberhaven for figuring out it happened, and calling it out. So
I mean, the only thing that I could think of that would help is going after the initial inbound phishing email coming from maybe a recently registered domain
mm-hmm.
and kind of trusting that, or having some sort of secure web proxy that also limited what websites you go to based on recent. But that's easy to get around if you're a bad guy. I don't know. I got to
Right.
do some more thinking on this one. It's a pretty clever one.
Yeah, for sure.